Okay. I'll be talking a little bit about disability because I'm from Handicap International. So just a bit of a background on disability. In the event of a disaster, people with disabilities are frequently cited as being amongst the most vulnerable members of society. A person with disability usually faces greater physical exposure to hazards, especially in terms of their impairments. It could be mobility impairments, communication capacities, etc. Social and economic marginalization is also often associated with disability and can also leave people with disabilities and their families more vulnerable to a range of short-term, medium and long-term economic and social impacts. While considerable anecdotal evidence exists on the risks posed to persons with disabilities, the reality of the situation in the event of a disaster has been rarely documented in a systematic way. Even less documented are the capacities employed by people with disabilities and their families to reduce their risks to disaster. We have studies like the research on the tsunami in Japan, which talked about people with disabilities being their mortality rate being double the ones without people, of others, and the UN study as well. While immediate impacts are usually wide-ranging and in relation to meeting basic needs and experiences of people with disabilities are usually similar to those of without disability. However, the presence of the disability amplifies the impact, increases the length of the time for which they are felt, and reduces the range of strategies available to cope with them. And this is really apparent, especially for financial and health impacts. And people with disabilities tend to be excluded from the relevant circles in disaster risk reduction. They tend to be invisible, lack awareness, face access issues, issues related to self-confidence. While efforts have been made to enhance representation of people with disabilities in DRR and decision-making processes, they are primarily numerical representation. Their involvement in decision-making remains tokenistic till they actually have a voice, can influence, have claim on the agenda setting, hold institutions accountable, and even choose not to participate directly in all stages of DRR. When people with disabilities have been active agents of change, there are many documented case studies and good practices that have been documented on people with disabilities as active agents of change in building community resilience. And a prominent example of the momentum that has been created by the disability networks such as DIDRRN, which has had an impact on the HFA review process from the zero draft now to the zero draft now, which explicitly does mention disability in 5 areas: in the preamble, in the guiding principles, in priority for action 3, where universal design is specifically mentioned, in social safety nets, and in their role as stakeholders. In terms of specific recommendations from the disability line that one would like to provide, one would looking at an increased engagement of government and other key DRR stakeholders with people with disabilities and their representative organizations. Increased disability inclusive disaster risk reduction policies and practices at national and subnational levels. Empowering people with disabilities and representative organizations to actively participate in, report on, and monitor DRM plans and actions. Extend the principles of universal design for infrastructure and service delivery. Strengthen community-based disaster risk reduction to empower people with disabilities. So, in short, this is, from the disability perspective, a very brief overview of the impact of disaster on people with disabilities actions that people with disabilities have taken both in the field as well as in advocacy spaces and recommendations for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear and clearly heard in the room. So thank you for that. Let's move on without further ado to Jake. Jake Romkadag is going to be talking about